The database shouldn't have made that noise. I sat at my console in the Academy Data Center, all three of my eyes fixed on the holographic display. Floating before me, the soft gray walls around me pulsed with gentle, bioluminescent light, and somewhere across the room, one of my colleagues was humming a working song. It was a pleasant afternoon. My tail curled contentedly around the base of my chair. Then the database made the noise. It wasn't a bad noise exactly, more of a surprised chirp, like the system had just discovered something it hadn't expected to find. My whisker tendrils twitched forward with curiosity. I leaned closer to the display, my prehensile tail uncurling to help me balance as I reached out with both arms to expand the data. The apex species rankings. I blinked, all three eyes in sequence. I'd been running a routine audit. Nothing exciting, just checking that all the galactic civilizations were properly categorized according to the Academy's threat assessment protocols. Insectoid species here, crystalline entities there, gaseous collectives in that folder, standard stuff, except someone had updated the rankings. My ears perked forward. Updates were rare. The rankings hadn't changed in 73 cycles. I scrolled through the list, my fur rippling with mild interest. The Krathon Empire still held position 47. The Silicon Collective was still at 32. The Void Dwellers remained comfortably terrifying at number 6. I kept scrolling, and then I saw it. Position 1 human. My tail went rigid. All my whisker tendrils stopped moving at once. I sat perfectly still, staring at the display, waiting for it to correct itself. It didn't. That's wrong, I said out loud to no one in particular. My voice came out remarkably calm, considering my fur had just started bristling along my spine. I pulled up the entry details with one hand, while my other hand opened the error reporting interface. Obviously this was a mistake. Humans were new. They'd only joined the galactic community 16 cycles ago. They were category 7 species at best, maybe category 5 if you were being generous about their tool usage. They certainly weren't apex. Apex meant dangerous. Apex meant species that could crack planets or fold space with their minds, or survive in quantum foam. Apex meant you sent diplomatic envoys with armed escorts and kept your distress beacon within easy reach. Humans wore clothing with words on it and ate food that was still moving and couldn't even extend their consciousness beyond their own singular bodies. The error report interface opened. I began typing. Database corruption detected in Apex rankings. Please advise Analyst Orin, a voice said behind me. I turned, my tail swishing once in acknowledgement. One of the council administrators stood there holding a data tablet. Her fur was the color of deep space, and she had the kind of calm expression that suggested this wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. Yes, I said, regarding your error report, she said, and my whiskers drooped slightly because I'd only submitted it 47 seconds ago, and she was already here. The ranking is correct. My ears flattened back against my skull. I'm sorry, what? The human designation as apex species is accurate, she continued, tapping something on her tablet with one claw. However, we need verification, physical observation of human behavior in their natural environment. You're assigned. Assigned, I repeated. My tail had started lashing back and forth entirely Without my permission. Assigned to what exactly? Human Station Outpost 77B. You'll observe their standard operational procedures and confirm the ranking assessment. She handed me the tablet. Transport leaves in 1 hour. But there I gestured at my screen with both arms, my fur puffing slightly. They're primates, they eat with their hands, they have one heart, singular. They die if they stop breathing for more than a few minutes. Yes, she said, please file your report within 3 cycles. Then she left. I sat there staring at the tablet, my whisker tendrils vibrating with what I told myself was professional concern and not panic. My fur slowly settled back down. I took a breath, then another. This was fine. This was a simple observational assignment. I would go to the human station, watch them do whatever mundane things humans did, document the obvious error, and return in time for the council to fix their database before anyone else noticed. My tail curled around my leg, which it only did when I was lying to myself. 1 hour later I was on a transport, and 3 hours after that I was standing in the docking bay of Human Station Outpost 77B, trying very hard not to let my fur betray my unease. The station was beige. Not deliberately beige in an aesthetic sense, but beige in the way things became when no one had bothered to clean them in several cycles, and multiple species had touched the same surfaces with questionable hygiene practices. The walls were metal, riveted together with visible seams. The lighting flickered every few seconds. Somewhere in the distance, something was making a grinding noise that suggested mechanical distress. I clutched my observation tablet against my chest with both arms and stepped carefully into the corridor. My tail stayed close to my body. Oh hey, you must be the academy guy. I spun around, my ears swiving first to locate the source of the voice. A human stood there, emerging from behind a maintenance panel that hung open on broken hinges. He was average height for their species, with brown hair that stuck up in several directions, and he wore a jumpsuit that might have been blue once but was now a color best described as mechanical failure. I'm Henry, he said, smiling in that way humans did, showing his teeth. He wiped one hand on his jumpsuit, which only spread the grease around, then extended it toward me. I looked at his hand. I looked at my tablet. I very carefully shifted the tablet to one arm and briefly touched his hand with my other hand, then immediately retrieved my arm back to the safety of my personal space. Maintenance worker, Henry continued, apparently unbothered by my reluctance. Heard we were getting inspected or observed or something. You need anything, just let me know. He turned back to the open panel, reached inside with both arms and pulled out something that sparked aggressively. My fur rippled. Is that supposed to spark? Probably not, Henry said cheerfully. He peered at the sparking device, turning it over in his hands, but it's been doing that for a week and nothing's exploded yet, so I think we're good. A week, I repeated. My tail twitched once. Yeah, really. Should fix it though. Just got to reconnect these power couplings, and he grabbed 2 wires and touched them. Together, the lights went out, all of them. We stood in complete darkness for exactly 3 seconds. My fur stood completely on end. My whisker tendrils vibrated so fast they hummed. Then emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in sickly yellow. Oops. Henry said, wrong wires, wrong. Wires, I echoed faintly. I was clutching my tablet so hard my claws were leaving marks in the casing. He happens all the time, a new voice said. And I turned to see another human approaching from down the corridor. This one was female, blonde, athletic build, wearing a security uniform that looked significantly more official than Henry's disaster suit. She carried a water bottle in one hand. Hey, you're the observer, right? I'm Lucia Station Security. The lights just went out, I said, because my brain hadn't caught up to the necessity of social pleasantries. Yeah, Henry does that a bunch, Lucia said. She didn't seem concerned. She seemed, if anything, mildly amused. Usually fixes itself, though. Fixes itself. Well, or Henry fixes it, same thing. Really? She took a drink from her water bottle, then looked at Henry. You fixing it? Yep. Henry was back inside the wall panel now, both arms elbow deep in what I was reasonably certain were critical power systems. Something sparked again. The emergency lights flickered. Should I be concerned? I asked. My voice came out surprisingly level, considering my tail was now wrapped completely around my left leg. Lucia laughed. Nah, Henry's great at this stuff. Watch. Henry pulled his arms out of the wall, holding a piece of equipment that was definitely supposed to be attached to something. He looked at it, rotated it, then looked back into the wall. Huh, I repeated. I think this is important, Henry said. The grinding noise I'd heard earlier suddenly got much louder. Oh, that's not good, Lucia said, but she still didn't sound particularly worried. That's the air recycler, isn't it? Might be, Henry agreed. He stuck the piece of equipment under his arm and reached back into the wall with both hands. There was a clanging sound. The grinding got worse. My ears flattened completely against my skull. Perhaps, I said carefully, we should contact someone with more specialized. The grinding stopped. The normal lights came back on. Henry pulled his arms out of the wall, now covered in something dark and viscous. There we go. I stared at him. My whisker tendrils had gone completely still. What did you do? Reconnected the power coupling, Henry said, and routed the air recycler through the secondary intake. Oh, and fixed that sparking thing. He held up the device. It was no longer sparking, possibly because it was no longer connected to any power source whatsoever. You just, I said slowly, randomly manipulated critical station infrastructure until it worked. I mean, it wasn't random, Henry said, looking slightly offended. I knew mostly what I was doing. Mostly, I repeated, like 60%. Henry clarified. Lucia nodded approvingly. That's pretty good for Henry. Last week it was like 40%, and he still fixed the gravity stabilizer. My tail unwrapped from my leg just so it could lash back and forth in agitation. He fixed the gravity stabilizer with 40% knowledge. Well, it's still working, isn't it? Lucia pointed at the floor meaningfully. Gravity's happening. She wasn't wrong. Gravity was indeed still happening. I couldn't argue with that assessment. What I could do was stand there holding my tablet, feeling my fur bristle and settle and bristle again as my brain tried to process what I was witnessing. Humans didn't fix things with precision. They didn't use calibrated instruments or follow established protocols. They just stuck their arms into critical systems and moved things around until The problem stopped, and it worked. So what are you observing? Henry asked. Closing the wall panel, it immediately swung open again because the hinges were broken. He looked at it, shrugged, and left it hanging there. Apex species ranking verification, I said, because honesty seemed important in this moment of existential confusion. Oh cool, Lucia said, we're ranked pretty high, right? I looked at her. I looked at Henry, who was now examining the dark, viscous substance on his hands. With curiosity, I looked down at my tablet, where the words "Position 1, Human" glowed softly. On the screen, my fur puffed up slightly. Would you like to show me more of the station? I asked, my voice remarkably steady. Sure, Henry said brightly. I got to check on the reactor cooling system anyway. Been making a weird noise. Every single one of my whisker tendrils went rigid. The reactor, I said. Yeah, it's probably fine though. Lucia finished her water and clipped the bottle to her belt. I'll come too. Haven't checked on the reactor deck in a few days. Might be fun, she said. Checking on a potentially malfunctioning reactor might be fun. I followed them down the beige corridor, my tail dragging slightly behind me, my ears striving to track every concerning sound the station made, and I began to suspect that this was going to be a very long assignment. The reactor was definitely making a weird noise. We stood in the reactor maintenance bay, which smelled like hot metal and something I couldn't identify but suspected was probably flammable. The reactor itself hummed behind a transparent barrier, glowing gentle blue that would have been soothing if I wasn't acutely aware that it was containing a controlled fusion reaction. The weird noise was a rhythmic thumping, like something inside was knocking politely to be let out. Hear that? Henry said, tilting his head. Both his arms hung relaxed at his sides, like this was a completely normal situation. Yes, I said. My tail had wrapped around my leg again. Should it be doing that? Definitely not, Lucia said. She walked up to the reactor console and tapped a few controls. Several readouts immediately turned yellow. Pressures building in the secondary coolant line. My fur began to stand on end. That sounds bad. It's probably fine, Henry said, which I was learning was his standard response to everything. He walked over to a maintenance panel on the side of the reactor housing, which was labeled in bright red letters. Authorized personnel, only critical system. He opened it with both hands. Are you authorized personnel? I asked, my whisker tendrils vibrating. I'm maintenance, Henry said. Like that? Answer the question. He peered into the panel, reaching one arm inside. Oh. Yeah, I see the problem. The coolant valve is stuck. Stuck, I repeated. My tablet hung forgotten in my arms. Happens sometimes. Just got up. He reached his other arm and braced his feet and pulled. There was a groaning sound of metal on metal. The thumping got louder. Several more readouts turned yellow. One turned orange. Henry, Lucia said, watching the console. That's making it worse. Yeah, but I almost got it, Henry grunted. He pulled harder. Something inside the reactor housing went clang. The thumping stopped. All the readouts turned green. Henry pulled his arms out of the panel, holding a chunk of twisted metal. There we go. The valve was completely corroded. No wonder it was stuck. I stared at the piece of metal. My ears had flattened so far back they were practically invisible. You just removed a valve from an active reactor. Well, it was broken anyway, Henry said. Reasonably. He looked at the metal chunk, then tossed it onto a nearby workbench where it landed with a clatter. I'll fab. New one later. Later, I said. My voice had gone up slightly in pitch. The reactor is currently operating without that valve. Yeah, but the pressure normalized, see. Lucia pointed at the console, which did indeed show all green readouts. Henry's got good instincts. Instincts? She said he'd repaired a fusion reactor with instincts. I made a note on my tablet with shaking hands. Humans approach critical systems with alarming confidence and no apparent regard for safety protocols. Somehow this works. Oh hey, while we're here, Lucia said, walking over to different panel, I should check the security sensors. Been getting false readings. She opened the panel. Immediately sparks shot out. She didn't flinch, just waved the sparks away with one hand like they were annoying insects. Yeah, that's not right, please. Don't, I started to say, but she'd already reached both arms into the sparking panel. The wiring's all crossed, she said. Who did this? Probably me, and recalled from across the room he was now examining something else entirely, holding a device up to the light. I rewired the sensors last month. You crossed all the leads, Lucia said. Did I? Henry wandered over to look. Oh yeah, I totally did, my bad. Lucia began pulling out wires. The security console behind her began flashing red. An alarm started blaring. My tail shot straight out in panic. Is that supposed to happen? I shouted over the alarm. Nope, Lucia shouted back. She pulled out another wire. The alarm got louder. Then she grabbed two wires and twisted them together. The alarm stopped. The security console went dark, then it flickered back on, showing a clean green status across all sensors. Lucia closed the panel, dusting off her hands. There we go, fixed. I looked at my tablet. I looked at the console. I looked at Lucia, who was taking another drink from her water bottle like she hadn't just blindly rewired a security system while alarms screamed. You didn't know which wires to connect, I said carefully. Not really, Lucia agreed, but there's only so many combinations. Usually get it right within a few tries. Usually within a few tries. I felt my whisker tendrils begin to vibrate so rapidly they hummed. You're stressed, Henry observed, walking over. Your fur is all puffed up. I'm fine, I lied. My fur was indeed completely puffed up. I looked approximately twice my normal size. This is just very different from academy protocols. Protocols are more like guidelines. Anyway, right, Henry said. No, I said. They're protocols. That's the opposite of guidelines. Huh, Henry said. Well, we should probably check the docking clamps. Been meaning to do that. We left the reactor bay, which was somehow still functioning perfectly. Despite Henry's repairs, I followed them through another beige corridor, past more flickering lights and exposed pipes, while I tried to organize my thoughts into something resembling a coherent report. The docking bay was worse. One of the clamps was visibly bent. Another was sparking intermittently. A third appeared to be held together with adhesive tape. Yeah, this is bad, Lucia said, hands on her hips. Finally, I thought, finally they recognize something is actually wrong. We should probably fix this before a ship tries to dock, Henry said. Good idea, Lucia agreed. They both turned to look at the clamps with identical expressions of Determination. My tail wrapped around both my legs. Do either of you know how to repair docking clamps? I asked, though already knew the answer. Not really, Henry said, but they're just big mechanical arms, right? How hard can it be? Those would be my last moments of innocence. Henry grabbed a toolkit that looked like it had survived a small war. Lucia pulled up a diagnostic screen that immediately showed 17 critical errors. And then they just started working. Henry climbed into the bent clamps, housing with both arms full of tools. Lucia began routing power through different systems, each change making new alarm sound that she casually dismissed. Sparks flew, metal screeched. Something began smoking gently in the corner. That's probably fine, Henry called from inside the clamp mechanism. The smoking got worse. I pulled up my tablet's emergency beacon interface just in case. Then Henry emerged, covered in even more grease, holding a piece of equipment that was definitely important. Found the problem. This stabilizer is completely shot. Can you replace it? Lucia asked. Don't have a replacement, Henry said. He looked at the broken stabilizer. He looked around the bay. His eyes landed on a completely unrelated piece of equipment mounted on the wall. But I bet that would work. Henry, no, I said. Henry walked over to the wall equipment, which was labeled life support relay, and began removing it with both hands. Henry, that says life support, I said. My voice had gone up another octave. My fur was standing so far on end, I was definitely twice my normal size now. Yeah, but this bay has redundant systems, Henry said, yanking the relay free. The lights flickered once but stayed on. See, fine. He carried the life support relay over to the docking clamp and began installing it where the stabilizer had been. It didn't fit. He pulled out a tool and started modifying the housing, metal shavings falling around his feet. Lucia watched the diagnostic screen. That's actually working. The clamps responding. My whisker tendrils had gone completely numb from vibrating. Henry finished installing the completely wrong piece of equipment into the critical docking mechanism, climbed out, and pressed a test button. The clamp smoothly extended, locked into position, and retracted with perfect precision. All 17 critical errors on Lucia's screen turned green. The sparking stopped, the smoking stopped. The bent clamp somehow looked less bent. Nice, Lucia said, offering Henry her hand. He slapped it in that gesture humans called a high five. I stood there, my tablet hanging limply in my arms, my fur puffed to maximum capacity, my tail rigid behind me, and I understood they didn't break things maliciously. They didn't sabotage systems or ignore safety. They genuinely tried to help. They had good intentions. Every single action was meant to fix something, to make it better. They just did it in the most chaotic, backwards, physics-defying way possible. And it worked. That was the terrifying part. It worked. We should probably head back, Henry said. Shift's almost over. I followed them back through the station in a daze, documenting everything with shaking hands. When we reached the docking bay where my transport waited, Lucia gave me a cheerful wave. Hope we helped with your ranking thing. She said. Yes, I managed. Very helpful. Henry smiled, teeth showing again. Humans are pretty great, right? I looked at him. I looked at Lucia. I looked at the station around us, held together with repairs that shouldn't work and fixes that violated every law of engineering. Position 1 human. Yeah, I said quietly, you really are. When I got back to the Academy data center, I filed my report. I documented everything: the reactor repair, the security rewiring, the docking clamp catastrophe, and then I marked the ranking as verified and accurate. My supervisor called me the next day. Are you certain? I thought about Henry, arms deep in a fusion reactor. I thought about Lucia, casually rewiring security systems by trial and error. I thought about their genuine smiles and their absolute confidence that things would work out. My fur puffed up slightly just remembering it. Yes, I said, position one is correct. I didn't elaborate. Some things were too terrifying to explain.